Hello and welcome to Allegory Story. My name is Melanie Nevis.
And I'm Tegan Aline, and I am also here with my dog Lena in case you can hear her in the background panting. Sorry, guys, but she's an old baby and she wants to snuggle. Welcome to Allegory Story.
Today we are going to be talking about Snow White.
Snow White. Oh my
Snow
gosh.
White.
So, what's your take on this one? I would love to know.
Conflicted because I really liked the songs that the dwarfs would sing,
Oh, okay.
Heigh-Ho is very catchy.
True. Sometimes I didn't, truthfully, I didn't really I was not really into Snow White. I think the dress wasn't hitting it for me. And I know that's ridiculous. I really everything back to fashion, but this is my world. So, I do occasionally just wander around singing Hi Ho. Like sometimes when I'm walking, sometimes when I'm like
See?
doing dishes.
And you're in the countryside, so I feel like it's really, it hits home for you. We could go into that bat cave singing Hi-Ho next time I come to visit.
Yeah, and sometimes Michael also has a pickaxe with him over his shoulder while we're walking, and it just
And the
really
little
brings it out to
bindle,
me.
right? Like the
Yeah.
little bindle. Yeah.
God.
So
Yeah.
I liked that aspect of it. I was kind of creeped out by the fact that there are these 7 old men
Weird, right?
that like help her out. I understand what you're saying about the dress. I think that's also the time that it came out, but we'll get into that a little bit more.
1,000%. The dress is not important. Just for me as a child, I think that's how I based things. Like, is it pretty? Then I like it. And for
Yeah.
me, the colors were just too primary.
Oh, so what did you think about Belle's dress? Beauty and the Beast.
That's a different story. I don't know. Okay. Oh, I don't know if we
I
have
guess it was more gold than yellow. No, we didn't do Beauty and the Beast. But
we
I guess it's supposed to be more. Yeah, we could do it
I like
another
it. I
time.
think Beauty and the Beast dress is more like gold.
Yeah.
And for that reason, I really love her dress. And I actually really like that story. And I don't know why we don't have it on the list of things to cover. Maybe we should make a note of that.
Yeah. I mean, well, there's so many fairy tales that I think we're gonna do the episodes that we have planned for this, and then we can always revisit fairy tales at another time or do
Yeah.
a Patreon
Yeah.
episode on it.
Yeah.
So for those of you that are listening, our Patreon is set up and you can check it out. Check out the details in the description.
It's not set up yet, but it's going to be by the time this
Well,
episode
it'll be
airs.
set up when this airs. So yeah, check out the description.
Like fingers crossed, just in case we don't get there. Lena's tangled up in the course.
Oh
Lena,
no.
couchez ma bébé. Okay, I think she's okay now. She's just like, I'm just gonna get mixed up under your desk. Anyway.
Yeah, so you weren't really a huge fan then of Snow White. No.
No, I don't know. I don't know. I just never got into it. I was okay, so like for reference, I'm a 1986 baby. And I guess I was watching these Disney movies when I was a kid. So probably like 87, 88, 89, 90. And I don't know. Snow White just never hit for me. I don't know why. But I often associate it to Germany for some reason. Don't really know why. I always thought it was a fairy tale that came from there. Is that a good segue?
Ah, well, it is. But so let's go into just the plot of the Disney version for those of you who may have forgotten because it's been a while. It's set into motion when a vain and wicked queen consults her magical mirror. We all know the line, mirror, mirror on the wall, who's the fairest of them all?
Mm-hmm.
And learns that her beautiful stepdaughter, Snow White, is now the fairest in the land. And she is instantly resentful. The queen enlists a woodsman to murder Snow White, but he can't commit the act and kind of urges her to escape. And in the forest, Snow White discovers a cottage that's inhabited by 7 eccentric dwarves.
Eccentric dwarves. I love that.
I mean, how else would you describe them?
No, exactly. Yeah, very that. Yeah.
They warmly welcome her into their home after she offers to cook and clean for them.
Right.
And the queen eventually learns of Snow White's whereabouts disguises herself as an old hag and fatally poisons her stepdaughter with the
That's
tainted
right.
apple. Heartbroken dwarves kind of stand guard over the girl's body, and then a handsome prince comes and restores her to life with a kiss.
Hmm.
So,
Who is
um,
this guy? Where did he come from? The question that is the universal question of every prince in one of these stories. I side note, I just want to preface.
mhm.
I think we might have said it in the earlier podcasts, but the reason we tend to start, I think, with the Disney versions is because that's the versions we grew up with when we were
Yeah,
young. Like that was
absolutely.
our first introduction. So we love to get into all of the other stuff, but that's why we're usually starting with that. We're not like hardcore Disney fans or anything necessarily,
No, no, no,
but
no.
we were Disney children. Like we grew up with those movies. So on VHS.
Yes, exactly. And as just a quick side note, like out of curiosity, what are your favorite Disney movies?
Oh shoot. Okay. Broad. Ooh, that's so hard.
Like
Listen.
growing up, what was your favorite?
So
Like,
growing up or now?
yeah,
Okay.
growing up.
Growing up, my favorite Disney movies were Cinderella. It was
Hmm.
huge for me. Um, Definitely was my favorite by far. Bedknobs and Broomsticks, which is like half animated and half
Like live
film
action.
with Angela Lansbury. This
Oh,
is like one of my absolute favorites. It's not like a super famous Disney one. It's like more like
no, it's
straight to
not.
VHS, like low key. But people who know it know it. It's the bomb. It's amazing. Those two I think were like my favorites. Oh, and also Aladdin. I loved Aladdin. Aladdin when I was a bit older and like the newer at the time, the newer Disney movies were coming out.
Yeah,
Aladdin was like the one for me. I was obsessed with Jasmine. I wanted to own a tiger. I thought Aladdin was
the
like the cutest guy I ever
songs.
saw in my life. I had such a crush on him. I loved that he was like like street smart and stuff. I loved everything about Aladdin. I was obsessed with Aladdin.
I loved Aladdin and Lion King. Those were my top two. And honestly, so Aladdin for all the reasons you said, but also the music. Like the songs were so good in
So
both of
good.
those movies. They
So
were
so
so
good.
so good.
Yeah, it was
And
amazing.
yeah, those were my top two. But
So Aladdin and
let's
Lion
turn it
King for
back.
you.
Yeah,
Lion King's
yeah,
such a good one too. Damn, it's really good.
such a good one.
I
Yeah.
don't know why I could never get into the movies that were all animals. Like I had to have people in them with an animal
Well,
fight.
Lion
I
King
don't
was
know
all
why.
animal.
Yeah, but like in Lion King was like for me I liked it, but I didn't get into it like super hard. I
Yeah,
think
that's
like
fair.
I was a Disney princess girl. Like I was attached to princesses. I can't lie.
Fair.
So
I
it's
was
really
not.
fun
I was like more of a
revisiting.
tomboy, and
Yeah.
so yeah,
No. Yeah, see, I
different.
was the opposite. I've been like I'm like hyper feminine out of the womb. I didn't do it on purpose. This is just like how I've always been. But I'm sure this stuff like didn't help. You know what I mean? With all that being said, I love looking at all of these stories because it kind of also helps me understand like the reality behind some of these tropes. Like I was looking at pretty
Hmm.
dresses, but there was like so much more going on than that. And the
There's so
one
much
last
more, and
thing,
yeah.
sorry, yeah. Oh, go
No,
ahead,
it's
go ahead.
okay. No, I was just gonna say, like, even when we were growing up, like the societal norms were very, especially different than the way
Yeah,
that they are now. Like
so
there is
different. Yeah.
change there that is
Thank
actively
God it's
happening and
different.
it's
Yeah.
visible. But at that time, it was still very segregated. Like gender stereotypes were very set
Oh,
in
that's
stone
so
and
true.
firm, and like just stereotypes in general. We've got stereotypes now. They are a bit different to what they were at that
Yeah,
point.
for sure.
Some are still the same, but
Yeah.
in terms of gender, I think gender norms are changing for sure.
I love that we now live in a world where anybody can love a princess and like their dresses. Like that's how I feel about it. But the last thing I'll say on Disney movies is in this moment in my life, My favorite movie I think Disney ever made was Moana. This movie is like a revelation
Mm-hmm.
to me. I will watch it and I will
Moana's
cry
excellent.
every fucking time. I love the plot. I love the story. Anyways, let's get back to
Yeah,
Snow
Moana's
White. We're
amazing. I
going way
completely.
back in time to this was like
Okay.
one the first Disney princess movie, wasn't it?
Yeah. Okay. So
Okay, sorry.
the Tale of Snow White is. Some scholars argue that it's a Grimm Brothers original in its written form.
Oh,
It was first
really?
published. Yeah, and I'm going to butcher the German pronunciation right now, so
We're not
apologies.
pronunciators.
Um, Sneewittchen in their book in 1812. So early 19th century, the tale contained many elements that we know and love today. So it includes the magic mirror, the poisoned apple, glass coffin, the
Mm.
characters of the evil queen, as well as the
Ooh.
seven dwarves. And that was just their first publication. They do publish it repeatedly, and
Yeah,
elements change and soften in later publications.
right. They were too rough for mainstream media, even then.
Even then, the dwarves didn't actually have names until the story was brought to Broadway in 1912. And I always think of the dwarves, and you kind of think of them that the names are in your head in the same way that Santa's reindeer are in your head. Like you kind of just remember them.
But
But at
wait, wait,
that
wait, wait,
point,
wait, wait. They had a Broadway show? Really? I
yeah,
had no idea.
yeah,
Wow. Okay.
yeah.
Okay.
So 1912, it was brought to Broadway.
Wow.
And then they named the dwarves. So we
Okay.
know them as Doc, Grumpy, Happy, Sleepy, Bashful, Sneezy, and Dopey. And I gotta say, those names are a lot
Dopey.
better because they were called Blick, Flick, Glick, Snick, Plick, Wick, and Quee.
Holy crap! It's like the original Snap Crackle Pop kind of situation.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Whoa,
So
that's a tongue twister.
it's a tongue twister. It's a
Yeah.
tongue twister. The Broadway show was a huge success and
Hmm.
became the basis for the 1916 silent film Snow White. So there was a black and white silent film.
Wow, fascinating. That's
Yeah, the
cool.
same actress that was on Broadway playing Snow White was also the same actress playing Snow White on in the silent film. And
Cool.
that film was seen by a certain 15-year-old. Any guesses who?
Was it Walt Disney?
Yeah.
I was right. Well, I mean,
Yeah.
okay, cool.
Yeah. So Walt Disney saw the silent film and was inspired to recreate the story in its animated form years later.
Get out
So
of town.
Snow White comes out in 1937. Walt Disney produced this with a mostly borrowed budget of $1.5 million,
Whoa,
which in 1937
a lot of
is a
money.
very huge sum of money. The equivalent today is about 31.6 million.
Holy shit.
And yes, movies cost a lot more than that now, but for the
Mhm.
time, that was insane. And the animated feature was a huge success. Like it was a critical, like commercial success. It took more than $8 million in its initial release.
It's so
So
funny because I was like, because one of the things that like I wasn't attracted to, even in the '80s as a kid, I was like, the animation is kind of just like,
yeah,
but it just goes to show, like, you don't know, and
mm-mm.
especially when we get into art, like that's a whole conversation for another time. But I mean, like, the amount of work and effort that probably went into that for some stupid
Yes.
little like 4-year-old to be like, "Meh,"
I
you know what I mean? It's just like, come
don't
on,
like
this dress is not for me, you know, like.
it.
Wow,
So
that's
like
wild.
yeah, and so when you look at the animation and you see how different it is from other Disney films that we may have grown up with, you realize that the animation didn't really change. When we were watching it, it was still like the same 1937 animation. Um, so that is probably why you don't like the dresses style, you don't like the colors that are used. Like it was just a very different period.
Yeah,
And
I'm not trying to
for
shade it or anything. I'm
no,
just
no, no,
saying how I
no,
felt as
but
a
you
kid.
like what
Yeah,
you like and you don't like what you don't like,
especially when
right?
you're young. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
There's no nuance when
Um,
you're 4 or 5.
no, absolutely not.
There should be, but there's
Uh,
not.
there's not. You're a kid. What do you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah, nothing. Nothing.
um, For many, many years, Snow White was the world's highest grossing animated film. So it's not anymore, but it's still in the top 200s. When you think of how many animated films have actually come out since then, that's
Yeah.
pretty astonishing.
Yeah.
Um, so let's take a look at Walt Disney himself. He was actually quite religious.
Really?
Uh,
I don't
yeah,
know.
in
I don't know anything about
1949.
this guy other than that he's like cryogenically frozen or something, and he's shady, and the whole of Disney is like, I don't know, corrupt. I don't know. I don't know. I know nothing. I know nothing. That's just what I've heard.
Well, so we're not going to delve too far into his character
Yeah, we
and like
can.
what he
We
did
can. We
later.
can.
In 1949, he wrote, I was grounded in old fashioned religious observance. My people were zealous members of the Congregational Church in our hometown. My father, Elias Disney, was a contractor, built our local church, and was a deacon of the congregation. I was baptized there and attended Sunday school regularly. I believe firmly in the efficacy of religion, in its powerful influence on a person's whole life. It helps immeasurably to meet the storm and stress of life and to keep you attuned to divine inspiration. Without inspiration, we would perish.
Okay, well, I agree with that
So,
last part. I don't know about everything else. Yes to the
um,
inspiration. I get it. I get where people are coming from, especially at that time in relation to
yeah,
religion.
yeah. And I think, I mean, for some people, I have a very conflicting view of religion. I grew up Roman Catholic myself, and like,
Samesies. Yeah.
yeah, I understand that, for some people they really need to believe in that specific
Yeah.
power, let's
Yeah.
say,
Yeah.
that specific doctrine. And as long as no one's hurting anybody, I don't care. You believe whatever you want to believe. Just don't try and shove it down anyone else's throat, and be nice to each other.
Yeah.
That's
I have a
basically.
I've had like my views on the church. Like I grew up Roman Catholic as well. Like even my daycare was Roman Catholic. And I was Roman Catholic, and also went when I was 13, I was confirmed, and then I went to Roman Catholic high school and very promptly became a witchcraft practitioner. which I thought was like super defiant at the time. Like I felt really bad and guilty doing it, but I was like really called to it. And now as an
Mhm.
adult, I kind of look at it and I'm like, oh, well, in a sense, like that duality is very Catholic. So it really wasn't so
True.
out of touch. It was just out of touch in the North American spectrum of things.
Yeah. I
But
think
yeah.
that my kind of aha moment came when, again, I was also confirmed. But I went to public school, but then would go to Sunday school aside from that.
Oh my
And
gosh.
in public school, you're constantly told to question everything and to ask why and to really delve in and investigate.
Mm.
So I was that annoying child. And the Sunday school people, like, they hated the public school kids. They did not like us. There was very few of us. I think I had like six,
Shady.
and they did not like us. And I was constantly there asking questions and trying to get explanations and proof, because that's what you're told in public school. Like, you have to dig deep to find the proof, and you need evidence. And I was just told to have this blind faith, and it caused enough trouble one day. And I honestly, I don't know if it was just because I asked why too many times, or if I asked a specific question that irked the priest the wrong way. But he called my parents to come and pick me up early, because he just wasn't having it. And
Wow.
that was my aha moment, where I was just like, I don't know how I feel about this.
You guys suck. That's so wild and amazing and good for you. I mean, like I grew up, I was always in Catholic school until I went to college, and I always felt like it was a pretty good system, and I was pretty happy with it. But I mean, like we actually kind of grew up being scared of like public school kids. I don't really know why. But I think it's so much. I think as an adult now, thinking about having kids in the future, I'm like, I would want my kids to question things. I think questioning things, like the minute people tell you to cut your questioning off, it's like a
Mm-hmm.
huge red flag. That, in my opinion.
Yeah,
And
and
you
I
never
think
know what answers you're going to get, right? But you should be able to ask the
yeah,
question, I think.
exactly. So I think that if you want to believe something, that's fine. I think that constantly holding blind faith can be dangerous, as we've seen throughout history.
Yeah.
Um,
Nowadays,
but
they just call it a cult, right?
I know.
It's actually always been called
Can't
that. But
wait to
anyways,
talk about those. Can't wait to talk about those. Okay,
yeah,
so
yeah, we'll get into that.
to,
Okay, like back
to
to Walt Disney.
back to it, back to it. So to me,
Oh, that's
this
funny.
shows Disney's faith in God was not only one segment of who he was as a person, but it really influenced everything he did. And there are aspects of this that can be seen to come through Snow White as we know it today. It can also be
Mm,
seen in the Brothers Grimm versions, because at the time that they
mm,
were writing, the German population was mainly Protestant, specifically Lutheran,
mm.
and about a third was Catholic. So Christianity is hidden throughout this tale. And to me, Snow White is actually a story about creation, the fall, death, resurrection, and salvation. And her
Ah,
stepmother, her
okay.
stepmother can be seen as the
Intriguing.
figure of the devil, especially like when you think about the serpent in the Garden of Eden. Snow White was an
Mm,
Eve type in the story. So
mm.
let's take a look at the image of Eve.
Yeah. Oh,
So,
shit.
Brothers Grimm's Snow White is innocent. She is a child. In the story, she is 7 years old. She is not,
Ew. She's such
she
a
is not,
baby.
yeah, she's not that young adults of like 15, 16. Like, she is a child. She is 7 years old. And
That's
that
so
is the age of reason, I guess. And when the mirror tells the queen that Snow White is now the fairest in the land, after Snow White flees for her life, she lives with 7 dwarves. The queen comes to tempt her, and it's by biting the apple that she dies, and the dwarves keep watch over her for 3 days.
Mhm.
And then she sleeps for a long
Oh.
time until the son of a king comes to rescue her, and she is resurrected from the dead. So the numbers that are repeated in the story there are their numbers 7 and 3. And
Mhm.
those are really big numbers in a lot of religious traditions,
Biblical context,
but
yeah.
they are definitely
Yeah,
biblical numbers. Yeah. Do you know?
yeah.
Do you happen to remember what they stand for?
Well, I think the 7 is like the days it takes to create the earth, and
Yep. Yep.
3 days like the no, maybe that's not right. I was gonna say the days between Jesus dying and resurrecting and, like, coming back to life. Am I right?
Yeah.
Oh, shit,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah. So yeah,
Love my
Bible
biblical
scholars
history.
claim,
Woo.
like the biblical scholars claim, God created the world in 6 days and used the seventh day to rest. And because of this, 7 is representative of a full and complete world throughout the Bible.
Mhm.
And the number 3 biblically represents divine wholeness and completeness and perfection. So, if there were a desire to highlight an idea or a thought, a noteworthy figure in the Bible, the number 3 was kind of used to put a divine stamp of completion or fulfillment on the subject. But you're right, it also is like the number of days that it took for him to be resurrected.
Right. Oh, yeah, it's also Father, Son, Holy Spirit too. Like, yeah,
The
3 is a
Trinity.
very yeah, yeah,
It's a
okay.
very, yeah. So you see the numbers 7 and 3 repeated a lot in the story.
Mm,
Um, the Queen of Envy, we have our lovely evil queen. So pride and envy are the sins that demons can commit directly, because other sins require a body. Pride and envy don't. So they're pure
mm,
spirits. And right away, we can see that the queen is filled with both of these vices, with her
okay.
whole mirror, mirror on the wall, who is the fairest of them all. It's a sign
Right,
of her
true that.
vanity.
Yeah, okay.
Um, so
I've always thought a
the
little
look,
vanity never hurt anybody, but that's just a little vanity, not a
just
lot of
a little
vanity.
bit. You don't want to murder someone for being prettier than you.
No, that's definitely there's a line way before that line, but that's also a hard
Yeah,
line. Yeah.
like
No murder.
much less a child, much less
Yeah,
a child.
no. Yeah, anyways.
Yeah. So she has this looking glass that always tells her the truth, but all she does is seek to be admired by her for her appearance. And yeah, she seeks to destroy a 7-year-old child. When you look at the huntsman in Snow White, she sends out the huntsman to kill her.
Mm-hmm.
specifically to pierce her innocent heart. And Jesus in the Bible had his heart pierced by a centurion. And you
Ah.
have images of innocence, like there's a duality of innocence there with Snow White and Jesus in that case. Um,
Ooh.
Snow White being completely innocent causes the snow, or not the snow, the huntsman, to repent and let her go. And in the Grimm's version, he describes the response as like the way he felt after, as it seemed as if a stone had been rolled from his heart. What do you think that refers to?
Mm, is it a biblical thing again?
Yeah, it is a biblical thing again.
Is it like the stone being rolled away from the cave type thing?
Yes. Yeah, because only when it was rolled away from the cave was Jesus resurrected, right?
Right, right, yeah.
So that's a very clear allusion to the Bible,
That's that
right? Like a
Catholic upbringing
stone.
right there. Know all of these references.
A stone rolled from his heart. It's a reference to the resurrection of Christ. Um,
Hmm.
I know.
That's so
So
wild.
he,
That's so interesting.
I know. So
So
like these are
wait.
the yeah.
Sorry. Go ahead. No, no, no. Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just. I have a question, but maybe I'll wait. I'll
Yes.
wait and I'll ask after.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So he allows her to go free, and she ends up in the home of dwarves. Dwarves. This one is interesting. It's an interesting parallel. Dwarves live and work underground, which is where the dead are.
Mm-hmm.
But death in the story is also like a potential wisdom,
Yeah.
and God, who is wisdom himself, is the author of life, and so he rules over death.
Mm-hmm.
So
Okay.
there's like an encounter with death in the story, and going to the place of the dead is what Jesus did after he died on the cross.
Right.
And then when he rose again from the place of the dead. So he conquered death. And Snow White, essentially, there's like a parallel of Snow White going
Ah.
and staying with these people who like live their world underground.
Okay.
So like,
Oh, that's so interesting. Oh, that's so
mm-hmm,
cool and weird. And I
mm-hmm.
never would have put these two stories together, like
I
as
know.
kind of coming from a similar place, but
Yeah.
that's wild. So what
It's
comes first, the
interesting.
chicken or the egg here is like what I wonder. I guess the biblical
What do you mean
story
by,
comes first,
well,
right?
yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Biblical story comes first. Like, and this in its own weird way has a lot of references to it. But they were Christian, and the Grimm brothers were German. It is a German
Oh.
story.
Okay,
um,
so the Grimm brothers were Catholic Christian? Or they
I don't
were
know if they were Catholic. The majority of Germans at the time were Protestant, but still
okay.
Christian.
Okay.
A third was Catholic, so I don't know. um, like Protestants still believe in Christ.
Yeah, right, 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 right. Okay. So my
Yeah.
question is, why does
Hmm.
like if this is the parallel, why does it become a woman? Because you don't see that happening so much where
No.
a protagonist that's a man, especially like a man like Jesus,
Hmm.
becomes a woman. So like how does that happen? That was my question for
Um,
you there.
so I'm almost there.
Okay, sorry,
I'm
shit.
almost there. No. Hang tight, because we're gonna do the biblical thing, and then we're gonna go into the historical thing instead.
Okay, sorry. I'm
No.
excited.
It's a good question. It's a good question. I like your line of thinking.
Okay, cool.
Um,
This is fun.
and
I'm
then,
learning. I love learning.
and then in Snow White, the wicked stepmother tries to kill her 3 times. The third time is with the poison apple, and when she eats the apple, just as Eve eats the forbidden fruit, you know,
Right. Hmm.
she has that she has that death moment, and the dwarves have a wake for her for 3 days. They can't bear to actually put her in the ground. So
Mm.
the happily ever after, of course, comes. The son of a king who's never actually called a prince in the Brothers Grimm sees her and falls in love with her. And the prince is this symbol of Christ as well. So, like, it's
Mm.
interesting because, yeah, Snow White kind of plays this role of Eve, but has a lot of parallels to Christ. But
Mm-hmm.
the prince is the symbol of Christ because he's kind of the one who saves her. He's her savior in a way.
Oh, interesting.
He
That's so
carries the
interesting.
glass coffin into his father's house. On the way, she coughs up the apple that was stuck in her throat and is resurrected. Now, how she coughs up the apple is actually hilarious in the Grimm's versions because in one version, the servants are like they're carrying like the prince is ordering them to carry this glass coffin everywhere he goes, like room to room. Come with me. And they're getting tired, and in one of them, the servants accidentally drop her, and that's what dislodges the apple.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the other one, the servants are so fed up. They're so fed up that like they start smacking her face, and that's what dislodges the apple.
Bitch! They smack her face, and one accidentally kind of like punches her in the throat while they're at it. And then she just like,
Like you stupid, like they're smacking a 7-year-old.
oh my God, I forgot she was 7 years old. I'm thinking of like an adult woman. Oh my God, that's so.
No,
Why are they mad
it's
at her?
terrible.
She's dead and poisoned.
She's dead, but they're like fucking hell. Like they have to carry her around. They're I don't know.
She's
They're taking
7.
their
She's
frustration.
small.
I know, and they're taking their
I got
frustrations
it.
on the dead small girl
Yeah,
instead of the
that's dark.
prince that could probably
That's
have him
dark in its
killed.
own way.
It's it's dark in its own way.
The more I hear like the little, I can't wait to do this piece on Grimm specifically, because the more I hear the little snippets from those, like I read all these stories when I was little because I had like the collection of Grimm fairy tales when I was young.
Yeah.
But the more I listen to the little snippets of that as an adult, I'm like, these guys, I actually appreciate their take on things a lot. Actually, it was honest in a lot of ways for fairy tales. Anyway,
Yeah.
in some
Yeah.
dark, really dark ways.
um, but yes, so she coughs up the apple that was stuck in her throat and is resurrected. And the Grimm's brothers actually say that this third time that this happens, that she was resurrected, the dwarves kind of saved her previously, and they say that she was resuscitated. But the third time she was actually dead, and they say that she was resurrected instead. So that
Okay.
specific word, with it being the third time, is a very clear draw from, you know, Jesus' story. And then they marry and live happily ever after, but that is the story arc. Like it's very much the creation, the fall, salvation
That's so
in Snow
interesting.
White. I
Wow.
know.
And I guess it would
I
it
know.
would make sense, I guess, to incorporate like a little bit of, like biblical reference in some ways into stories, because I
Mm-hmm.
think a lot of people like start out with the biblical stories first, right? So like
Exactly.
there's some parallels or there's some similarities that make it feel safe and like maybe less pagan, because I think like in
Yeah.
medieval Europe it was a hot moment. People, there was a lot of fear going around in relation to that kind of thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so, towards the question that you had asked of like, why is the protagonist then a woman, and why is there this relation, like correlation of her being like this Eve like character, but also having a lot of references to Christ herself.
Mm-hmm.
So there may be upwards of like 400 versions of Snow White. The
Gosh.
oldest may be a medieval Norse saga written in the 12th century by a poet named Snorri Sturluson, which sets the tale in the time of Harold Fairhair in the 9th century. But
Mm-hmm.
they're quite different. So the saga and the German tale share some similarities in the sense that there's like this beautiful girl, there's a prince, they fall in love, she dies, but that's kind of where the similarities end. And the two stories are super different. There's no poisoning, no apples, no wicked stepmother, no dwarves. So if the Norse tale is the origin, how did the other elements end up in the German version of the tale? Is it like you have to ask, is it the product of an unknown storyteller's imagination, or is the German fairy tale somewhat rooted in historical fact?
Yeah, this is kind of what I was just thinking, because as we've been like learning about these stories, the stories that seem to I don't know, this for me, in my opinion, what I'm feeling so far is the stories that tend to have more of a connection to, like, when I think of them, I think of Germany, for example. I said that for Snow White. I think of it for
Yep.
Little Red Riding Hood as well. They seem to track into these like Norse mythologies from like the Scandinavian countries. And then on the flip side to that, a lot of the like ones we've looked at that were really ended up kind of being tracked through Italy and France tend to have a connection to like Greek and Roman history. So it's really interesting how that's happening so far anyways. And I know they overlap and intercept, but like I just think that's cool.
They do.
Yeah.
And so there may be truth to it having origins in this Norse tale,
Mm-hmm.
but there are a lot of scholars that actually suggest that Snow White uh, lies in a more modern history with it's basically based on a real royal beauty named Margaretha von Weldeck. Margaretha was a daughter of Philip IV of Wildeck and Wildingen
Mm-hmm.
and his first wife, Marguerite. And so he lived from 1493 to 1574.
Mm-hmm.
So we're looking at the 16th century.
Mm-hmm.
Margaretha was born in 1533, and they lived near a small town in northwestern Germany. She was the second daughter of the couple, and her mother died when she was only 4 years old. And there is a surviving portrait of Margaretha, which shows her wearing this beautiful dress, but she is a dark haired beauty
Mm.
with fair skin, ruby lips, rosy cheeks. The same way that Snow White is often described is how Margaretha was described and how she actually kind of looks in this portrait.
I bet you'd like that
So,
dress more.
probably. After her mother's death, her father married again, and his new wife was Katharina von Hatzfeld, and she was also a
Von
noblewoman. As
Hatzfield.
you
What a
Von
name.
Hatzfeld, I know.
Wow. Okay.
Van Hatzfeld, I don't know. So she got a stepmother. Margarita got a stepmother, and the facts about the relationship are kind of lost to time. But we can assume that they didn't really get along. When she was about 16 or 17, she left home
Okay.
and she was sent away. So it was 1550 when she was sent away, but she didn't leave her home. Like, they sent her away to Brussels. They sent her to live in a
Ooh,
different
that's
country.
far at that point. It's like two countries away.
Exactly. Her,
Yeah.
her father had a specific objective in mind. My daughter needs a suitable husband.
Yeah, word. Welcome to medieval times.
Yeah. So she arrives in Brussels. Her beauty causes quite the sensation, and she settles and attracts the attention of the future King Philip of Spain, King Philip II of Spain. So at this time,
Mm.
he's still just the prince. And the legends tell us that Philip fell in love with her, and she fell in love with him.
Ooh.
And he wanted to marry this girl from Germany.
Is it gonna get
But
dark? It's gonna get dark, is it? I don't know.
yeah, but this is the real story.
Okay.
This
Yeah.
is the real story.
Historical facts.
So Philip, like many other royals who sit on thrones, are expected to marry for political reasons. They're not expected to marry for love or
Oh, right.
infatuation.
Yeah, that's right.
If love enters a marriage of convenience, then that's a benefit. That's like a great benefit, but one should never expect that to be the case. The union was forbidden by Philip's father because the king didn't see any political value of the marriage.
Oh boy.
And
Yeah, okay.
Marguerite had nothing meaningful to offer Philip by way of political alliance. So someone,
I kind of understand that, like, in context of the time. I don't agree with it, but
yeah,
like on an emotional level.
yeah,
That's so bad. That's so sad that like I will never understand that about royalty. Anyway,
I know.
why did they
Someone
do
who
it?
wanted to protect Prince Philip and his future throne, perhaps to harm Marguerite as well, made sure that no marriage would ever take place between the prince and the beauty from Germany. We don't know exactly what happened. Maybe Philip's father, who was king of Spain at the time, who was also dead set against this romance, got one of his men to murder her, but no one really knows the truth. All we know is that while still living in Brussels, Marguerite became extremely ill, and people
Oh.
who knew her thought that she had been poisoned. And she was actually writing her last letters like with a very shaky hand, and ended up dying at the age of 21.
So young. Ugh.
Yes.
Oh. Things just start to get good at 21.
I know.
Oh,
So,
God.
assuming that Margarita was poisoned, who did it? I mean, like, realistically, uh, it's not her wicked stepmother.
Yeah.
Her stepmother had died years beforehand. So, a lot of people will say, like, maybe it was the stepmother from afar. It wasn't. She was already dead. Um, it's likely that people in Spanish court poisoned her to keep her from marrying the king. And while it is unlikely that it was like a poison apple as the weapon of choice,
Yep.
there seems to be evidence that that part made its way into the tale, because there's some evidence that a man living in Wildingen actually gave poisoned apples to children who he
Oh.
expected or suspected were stealing from him.
Oh,
So that
okay.
might be how
Mm.
like the poison apple specifically ended up in the German fairy tale.
Right. That
And
kind of
like,
makes
what a
sense.
dick that man was.
Yeah, that's a dick
He
move, but I mean,
stole.
it like also doesn't surprise me for the time either. Like what we were
I
talking about
know.
yesterday, like children are not children at this time. They're not considered
Mm-hmm.
like the way we consider children now. But it
Of course
is
not, but
a huge dick move.
it's a
And
huge dick move.
the other thing I was going to say is I haven't gone deep down the rabbit hole of Spanish history yet, but from everything that I know of medieval Spanish history, these guys were like
Well,
shady balls.
they
Super
started the
shady.
Inquisition, man. Like, there's Spanish history is dark. It is
Yeah.
dark.
Oh, I
Okay,
actually
so
have some really interesting information on that, but we'll save that for a different set of podcasts.
yes, please.
Yeah.
Um, so that is kind of the real origin, or the tale that it seems to have borrowed from. And it makes sense because it is a German princess, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah,
they are
totally.
German. So there's a lot of other things that happen in and around the area that Margarita would have grown up in Germany.
Mhm.
Besides just the poisoned apples, like you think about the dwarves and
Mhm.
who the heck could those have been? This is also really sad. So Marguerite's brother, first her father, then her brother inherited it, but they owned copper mines in Wildingen,
Okay.
which was employed by children
Yeah.
who worked 12-hour days because child labor was a thing.
Oh,
And
shady.
crawl
Oh.
spaces and mine seams and shafts were frequently so small that only children could get through them. And due to the type of work, the lack of nutrition, their growth was stunted, their spines would be curved, so they were often referred to
Oh.
as dwarves. And
Oh,
it's also thought that
no.
the mine gases, prematurely grayed their hair. And the workers would live in small cottages that would house multiple people at a time, like up to 30 occupants. And most of these kids would be dead before the age of 20.
This is so dark and so fucking sad. And like the more we touch on the
Yeah.
Brothers Grimm, I actually think even though their stories are kind of dark, I'm kind of starting to understand them as like sweet people actually in a way, which I'll break into when I talk about Little Red Riding Hood and why I'm thinking that right now, but this is my immediate feeling because
Interesting.
yeah, because they like well, just even in this example of these, if these kids, if that was really happening in a way through their story, they turn them into something of like clearly these kids were not cared enough about. So like in the story,
Yeah.
if they become like the seven dwarves, then they become a bit more cared for. Like look how many people just like absolutely like love the seven dwarves now. You know what I mean? In a
Yeah.
way, it's like their spirits kind of get some kind of love in the end. Oh, it's so sad. That's
Yeah.
heartbreaking.
It was just a byproduct of the time. But that is probably how the dwarves actually found their way into the story. So it's interesting to see this overlap of, like, there's a lot of Christian elements and religious elements, but
Yeah.
Snow White in particular, you know, maybe there's something that started in the Norse realm, but it's this in particular is very much a German tale. And,
Yeah.
you know, the Brothers Grimm got their works from other places, you know, like there are Italian and French people who would write first,
Yeah.
and then they would create darker versions. But this actually seems to be based in German history a lot of the time with a biblical element thrown in.
I actually feel like their versions are more honest in a lot of ways. Even if they're
Yeah.
darker and sadder, they're more honest. And thinking about the fact that they were kind of, and most of the versions we talk about leading up to this are like 16th century, and then they come in the 1800s. So I guess that's like
Mm-hmm.
the 19th
Not
century.
19th. Yeah.
And start writing this, it feels like an attempt to be like more real about
Mm-hmm.
fairy tales, which is kind of like, I don't know, is that even a thing? But they do come from real things. There's real stories. I don't know. I'm really genuinely starting to
They
appreciate them on a whole new level, to be honest.
they do. And, you know, a lot of the stories that they recorded, they did still go around and talk to people and amalgamate
Yeah.
these tales that were told orally. Like,
Yeah.
so it's not like they may not have even written Snow White. It may have just started from this queen, or sorry, from this princess.
Hmm.
And then there were tales in and around that specific area of Germany, and it kind of all blended together orally before they even got to it.
So,
We don't really know.
this is just thinking of where we're saying, and a lot of the stories we've covered so far, I think all the stories we've covered up till this point have been about princesses. And like we grew up in around the same time, so I'm pretty sure you would remember the time where guys used to refer to girls as princesses. It wasn't like that long ago,
Hmm.
but
It really wasn't. Yeah.
when a guy was referring to a girl as a princess, it meant that she was like, tra la la, look at me, I'm fine, people do
Hmm.
everything for me, I get whatever I want. Like that was like, it was like an insult to be called a princess, and that shit always pissed me off, because I was like, princesses have been murdered, they've been used, they've been sold, they've been like traded
Hmm.
forever, and you're trying to like degrade, like downgrade it to like a girl who gets people to get her whatever she wants. It's kind of always infuriated
Well,
me.
that is language for you. I mean, like,
Mm.
there's a specific word that comes to mind of the female anatomy that is used to describe people who are wimps.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Puss in Boots.
That specific, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That specific part of the female anatomy pushes babies out. I'm pretty sure they're a lot stronger. Like,
Yeah.
that is a lot stronger
Yeah.
than any male equipment.
Yeah,
Just
really.
saying. Just saying. So, you know, it's another classic. Language is, we live in a patriarchal society. Language is very patriarchal.
Mhm.
And that's a perfect example of it. And so it doesn't surprise me that Cinderella and princesses and everything like that, you know, it doesn't surprise me that that word princess is seen in a derogatory way, or like
Yeah.
can be viewed
Or like even
negatively.
shoot, I had a good train of thought, but I lost it. Damn it. Okay, I'll get it back later. Anyway. But yeah, absolutely. It's just wild when you actually like recount these stories. And I think for so long, a lot of this kind of exploration of stories. Now, okay, in our modern times, like in our lifetime and even in the lifetime before ours, there have been women exploring these from like a more like feminist lens, or there's people exploring all of these stories from different lenses.
Yeah.
But it's relatively new in that sense.
Hmm.
But I actually like, that's part of why I'm actually also feeling for Brothers Grimm. I feel like in a way they're trying to be a bit more like, have a different perspective in their storytelling, which I think is really, really cool. But this is fascinating. I had no idea that there was like a potential real historical connection, a
I know,
biblical
isn't it cool?
connection. Like
I know.
it's really, really wild how stories kind of transfer and, kind of pass around, and they follow for so long. And like these stories we're talking about in this series are like really old. They're like really, really
Yeah,
old. And yet they're still
yeah.
really predominantly with us, and they keep being reinterpreted, reinterpreted in new ways. And it's really, really wild. So, okay, ultimately then, like my question is, what is is there supposed to be a moral of this story? Like, don't eat apple. It's not that. But like,
Well, I guess if you're looking at the moral, then it's the biblical thing to live your life in a good way. Christ is the savior. Like that's kind of the moral that passes down, I suppose.
mm,
Because other than that, I don't necessarily like, don't be vain. Um,
oh yeah, kind of
don't let
comes
your
through.
vanity get the best of you. That kind of comes through. Um,
Oops.
I think that's the moral, but other than that, it was like based in legend and stories that were told in that area and was just kind of given a Christian twist.
I think it's something to say, like I said in the beginning of this episode, I considered that I've been hyper feminine most of my life. Um, really, like I was wearing high heels and dresses to school in like grade 6 when everybody else was like wearing running shoes and track shirts, and they were like, "What the fuck are you doing?" And I was like, "I don't know, I'm being me," like. But I think
Oh,
there's something to be said because um, when I was younger, I did gravitate to princesses, and the older I get and the more experience I've had in my life, the more I see myself in terms of like the more villainous characters. To be honest, and I not that I act in a villainous way, but it's like when you have age and maturity, you look at things differently. And I would never like look at a 7-year old and like want to hurt them, for example. Not that
no,
kind of villain, but like in the sense of you have an understanding of the world that's like heavier, it's different,
of
it's
course,
sometimes
yes.
darker. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And a lot of the times you're looking at men kind of pissed off, like a lot of the female villains are. So sometimes I can relate. And I think it's just that idea in itself is like pretty big, that you can go from thinking in this one way to thinking this other way in the course of a lifetime, in the feminine identity. You know what I mean?
Yeah, like there's always two sides to every coin.
Mm,
Um, I think that in this particular instance, it was probably the Spanish court that killed Margarita, but the evil stepmother trope that we kind of talked about in the last episodes made for a better story.
mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
and I think, yeah, okay. So back to the moral. I think that the moral is don't be vain. Kindness will take you a lot further.
Mm,
But so I have a harder time because I understand what you're saying. In certain cases, I understand the evil perspective, quote
mm,
unquote, evil perspective. In this situation, like it really does seem like she's just vain and kind of threatened by this young girl, which is, I
yeah.
don't know that there's a positive spin there.
I think again, vanity is a result of society telling you like
Yeah,
your
the you have to be
worthiness.
young and yeah, yeah. I mean, we
and
see it
and like
today.
we've seen it forever, like the
Young,
way women are,
beautiful, yeah,
it's another way women are pitted against each other, right? Like beauty
yeah.
is like a huge way in which women are pitted against each other. So
You
I
know what I also really find interesting is the fact that she disguises herself as like this old hag, this old decrepit hag to give Snow White the apple. And I'm like, of course, witches are presented as like these old, gnarly creatures. That's a whole other story.
Yeah, that's a whole other story. There is a lot
That's a
happening
whole
in
other thing.
relation to witches in medieval Europe, and werewolves apparently,
Hmm.
as I was reading today. But yeah, we'll get
Cool.
into that at another point, I guess. I'm yeah, yeah. Anyways, okay, without jumping to too many topics, this has been so great. I love your take. I love the way that you present these stories. They're so good. And I love the amount of knowledge that you have. I think you definitely have way more knowledge than me on this stuff. So I just like love listening to everything. I feel like I've learned today. So
Yay!
it's so cool. And I am very excited slash a little bit nervous to get into the next topic that we have. But yeah, thank you so much for sharing all of this information on Snow White. Like the more we keep going through these, the more I'm like, it's really changing my feelings and my relationship and with the idea of these stories. So it's really cool. And
I
I'm
know.
super glad this is where we decided to start. I think it's like perfect.
I think it's really cool to start with fairy tales because they're just the oral stories that kind of last and that are
Yeah.
still being retold today, much more innocent
And a lot
versions,
of
but
them,
they're being
yeah.
retold.
And a lot of them seem very surface level to a degree from what we know. But like when you dive
Mhm.
in, they're really heavy. They cover a lot of like deep topics and different perspectives you can take them from and all that stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah. Super
Exactly.
cool.
All right. Well, next time we are going to be doing Little Red Riding Hood, which I am excited for.
Yeah, this one's
I'm
also a doozy of a
I'm
story.
excited for it.
Yeah.
It is.
It's going to be cool.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
also gave me a new appreciation for her. Anyways, okay, yes. So
Yes.
please come back, join us for our retelling and our personal examinations of Little Red Riding Hood. And we hope you enjoyed today's retelling and examinations of Snow White.
Thank you so much,
Thanks,
and we will
guys.
see you next time.